Do most people that you talk to believe the Ramseys did it?
Almost entirely, that's my understanding. When I'm in, not just in New York or California or anywhere else, when I'm in Colorado, what I try to do is take a random poll. And so I'll ask the waitress and the hotel people, et cetera, who live in the town, and I'll just say, well, who do you think did this? And they invariably say the parents. And the defense team has said that they concede that this is the popular perception of the entire country that the parents did it.
That was October 1997, just 10 months into the Ramsey investigation. That was also the perception of the Boulder grand jury and law enforcement. But has that popular perception changed? What is the popular perception now? Do you think the Netflix series has changed hearts and minds? Has your perception changed lately?
You must remember the Ramsey defense team. I mean, they haven't been charged yet, but they do have a defense team. There are there's 8 lawyers that I am aware of that work for the Ramseys. There are 3 publicists. There are 2 handwriting experts. There is an FBI profiler. When Greg McCrary turned down the job, John Douglas took it. There is a huge $1 million team here at work that works around the clock to put out the message that John and Patsy Ramsey are innocent and to present their point of view and to try to, do their spin on this. So they've had some success, I suppose, but I think that nevertheless, with all that money and energy going, it still is the perception that they are guilty.
And now we are at 28 years later, and there's been a lot of spin since October 1997, including on Netflix, and including this upcoming Melissa McCarthy deal, Unspeakable. Have you thought about the fact that Team Ramsey had an arsenal of lawyers, a battalion that rivaled OJ's dream team, and it's come to the same result? And I mean, is there anyone here who believes a stranger killed OJ's ex-wife? What the Ramseys did that was way better than OJ was they, by hook or by crook, avoided their case even going to trial. And with an arsenal of 8 very high-powered lawyers, at least 8, I'm not sure that the District Attorney, Alex Hunter, couldn't be faulted for being intimidated, firstly, and then secondly, probably saw the OJ show opening in Boulder and kind of imagined the same result. I mean, Marsha Clark became the most famous prosecutor in American history in 1995, but not famous in a good way. She would tell you that. According to Wikipedia, Clark said that the media attention that she received during the trial was the hell of the trial. That was the worst part of the trial, the media attention. And she called herself famous in a way that was kind of terrifying. Now, one can imagine a small-town DA, who sent precious few cases to trial, wanting to preserve not only his reputation, but his idyllic life in the bucolic setting of Boulder. And of course, if he sent this case to trial, what was going to happen? And so, wanting to avoid the hell of a trial and the trial terror that the Ramsey case promised to be, it meant that, he would possibly lose in the full glare of the television cameras, just like Marsha Clark did. Also, remember the O.J. Simpson verdict happened on October 3rd, 1995. It took just 3 hours for the jury to process a trial involving 150 witnesses over 133 days, a trial that had cost $15 million to try. All of this just over a year before the Ramsey case exploded. The O.J. Simpson case, and by the way, I've written a trilogy of books on this case, and I've visited Brentwood, I've gone there myself. It was so embedded in the American psyche, Patsy Ramsey actually referred to the O.J. Simpson case in their very first interview on CNN on January 1st, 1997, less than a week after JONBENET died, and just a day after her funeral.
We don't know what happened with the O.J. Simpson, and America is suffering because they have lost faith in the American family.
When will you go back to Boulder?
Soon.
In a matter of days, you would think?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be difficult.
It's going to be very difficult for us. When we first left, we didn't think we could go back. But
I said the only reason I will go back is to help them find out who did this. That is the only reason. And I will do that.
Let's have a look at that again. The reporter asked the question, when will you go back to Boulder? Bear in mind, this is January 1st, 1997. And they're not in Boulder. They've left Boulder. They're giving an interview in Atlanta, right? And just look at Patsy's facial expressions when this question is asked. Also, you'll see that she kind of gulps. And I want you to think about, if Patsy's innocent, wouldn't she want to be catching the killer of her child and wanting to know what happened? Whereas if she's not innocent, wouldn't this whole idea of going back to Boulder and facing the consequences, facing the questions, facing the police, be quite a scary and horrifying prospect, especially if Patsy did write the ransom note?
When will you go back to Boulder?
soon.
In a matter of days, you would think?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be difficult.
It's going to be very difficult for us. When we first...
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Of course, Marsha Clark resigned from the District Attorney's office after she lost the Simpson case. Alex Hunter, the District Attorney in Boulder, he didn't seek re-election in 2000 after his term expired, but he got to retire kind of surfing a wave, albeit a small wave, of relatively positive press. Just think about what that wave might otherwise have been. It could also have been like that maelstrom in Pirates of the Caribbean. And who would want to be caught up in that maelstrom? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I just want to thank one of the people who's left a review on Christmas Star. It was left in the last day. It's the 110th review. Veronica writes, if you want a good opinion and insight about the JONBENET Ramsey case, I recommend this book for you. Christmas Star is doing quite well with an average of 4.2 out of 5 ratings. I'll put a link to that in the description. Then I also want to mention there's a micro channel with about 2,000 subscribers that has been actively pilfering content, taking ideas, copying a lot of the content from this channel. And I just want to ask you guys to take note of that. Please don't support a channel like that, because you can't believe how much work goes into each and every one of these episodes, and it's just so easy for another channel just to literally steal that work, repackage it, and get a lot of benefit when they know literally nothing about the case. They're just seeing that it's popular, and then they simply just copy it and package it and then get a reward for it when they really don't deserve it. So please do take note of that. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So I do want to talk a little bit about Alex Hunter. I want to make a couple of references to the O.J. Simpson case, which, as I say, I've written a couple of books about that case. I know it quite well. But then overall, just ask this question. All of this effort from the Ramsey side to declare their innocence, to repeat the same story effectively over and over again with a few changes. Could this suspect be the suspect? Yes, maybe it could be. Could it be John Marcar? Yeah, he definitely fits the profile. Could it be Gary Oliva? Yeah, it definitely fits the profile. So when it comes to different suspects, it's different stories regarding them. Of course, you never talk about the DNA. But then when it comes to talking about the ransom note and all these different things, and it's the same stock answers in every single interview. But I do think it raises a very interesting question. With all the money in the world, has that needle of public perception shifted? And if so, has it shifted a lot? So let's go back to Alex Hunter basically announcing that he's not going to run again for election. At the time, the Denver Post reported the following. while Hunter acknowledges the Ramsey case is a big portion of his term in office, I really think that's kind of his legacy. He said, it's not the most important piece. What's important is the brand of justice, I think, has come out of the shop, this criminal justice system, this community that I do not think the media, including local media, has covered as well as they might have. Now, I must say, when I think about Boulder, I think about the JONBENET Ramsey case. When I think about Colorado, I think about the Ramsey case. To some extent, the Watts case, Gannon Stork, Patrick Frazee, but I do think Boulder and Colorado are world famous for the JONBENET Ramsey case. And also, does it really tell you about the brand of justice coming from there in a good way? The criminal justice system coming from there in a good way. And so when Hunter says it's not the most important piece, I'm not sure if that's true. I think it's a very important piece that tells you a lot about the brand of justice coming out of Boulder, certainly in 1996. To its credit, the Denver Post didn't give itself entirely to puffing Hunter up in this farewell puff piece. They also write, to his critics, to Alex Hunter's critics, that brand of justice was marked by leniency, overuse of plea bargains, and reluctance to prosecute the tough cases. Now, if you think about those words, leniency, overuse of plea bargains, and reluctance to prosecute, doesn't that feel like the brand of justice that occurred in the Ramsey case? If there was ever a place to have a case not go to trial, we're saying this in hindsight, regardless of a Mount Everest of evidence, and I do think it's very interesting that Hunter tries to emphasize that there wasn't enough evidence or the evidence was insufficient, right? Regardless of a Mount Everest of evidence, it was Boulder where a chummy legal culture could decide outcomes. In other words, a chummy legal culture decides outcomes. It's not justice that is being decided. It's not about justice. It's not about the public interest. It's not about the greater good. It's about the chummy legal culture getting the outcomes that they want, the outcomes that serve them. And I remember when I wanted to be a lawyer, I studied law and I read the book The Rainmaker, and that whole legal culture that is real. The reason why people think of lawyers as sharks was kind of ultimately why I didn't become a lawyer. I didn't want to be part of that sort of incestuous, corrupt, backslapping fraternity where everyone is there ostensibly to fight for justice. In the meantime, a lot of other things are happening, which seems to be the opposite. It's like insurance companies that don't pay out insurance. It's like the true crime community that just keep undermining and insulting and criticizing the police, the people that are supposed to basically investigate and prosecute these cases. A true crime community that are all about victims and blaming, but it often seems to be blaming the wrong people, rather than just trying to find out the truth in an altruistic way. Why is there so little of that in the world? And so it's not surprising that Hunter says unapologetically at the end of this interview in the Denver Post, it's been a good life. And I think for quite a few people in the story, they didn't want their good lives to end. And so he was also unapologetic on Netflix. Listen to this.
It would have been easy to bring charges, but to have brought charges when you didn't feel you could make your case would have been a horrible thing to do. I feel at peace and to some extent proud of the fact that I weathered the storm and did the right thing based on the evidence.
Now, a lot of the whole thing around Alex Hunter was PR. You know, he was also trying to put a good spin on what he was doing. And so did he prepare the statement? Is this something that he knew in advance and chose his words carefully? Because it's interesting where he says, I feel at peace and to some extent proud of the fact, and then he looks down and he says that I did the right thing. Do you mind if I do a little statement analysis on this? Let's start with, it would have been easy to bring charges. Well, the DA didn't really make it easy. You know, it took 18 months just to get to a position where he was prepared to call a grand jury. And he only did that after the lead detective resigned, after Steve Thomas wrote a letter. And the letter really blamed him, blamed Alex Hunter for kind of scuppering this case. And then the governor intervened, and he essentially seemed to strong-arm Hunter by saying, if you don't, I will. At least that's how I understand it.
It would have been easy to bring charges.
And it does make you wonder, why not just bring the grand jury in right in the beginning? And then if you did mean to say, well, there isn't enough evidence or whatever, why did it need to take 3 years to get to that point? And I do think there was a legal strategy in terms of that long period of trying to exhaust the public's interest in this case, right? And so when I say, the DA didn't really make it easy, besides the 18 months to get to the position just to call a grand jury, that's then followed by a 13-month investigation, which ends up making it 3 years. And what was unusual was that the DA also allowed apologists to testify. So it wasn't like they called a grand jury and it was just a formality. That part the DA didn't make very easy as well, to bring charges. You had Team Ramsey investigators, including John Douglas, Lou Smith, and it's not 100% sure if the Ramsey investigator Ellis Armistead testified, but there's some reason to believe he may have. He certainly arrived while the grand jury were in session. And all of this, it still didn't convince the jury. The jury still weren't convinced of the intruder theory.
But to have brought charges when you didn't feel you could make your case.
Feel? Is this about feeling? It seems there were a lot of people who thought they could make their case. And the crazy thing about the Ramsey case right now is how convinced the Ramseys, the apologists, and the media are of the intruder theory. Now, think about that just in a very direct way. So if the Ramseys are so convinced of their case, if they're apologists, if you are so convinced of the intruder theory, and the media are supporting all of this as well right now, if we had a trial right now, if an intruder theory case went to trial right now, where prosecutors gathered for the express purpose of prosecuting a... sorry, who are we going to prosecute here? Like, which individual are we going to prosecute for the intruder theory? Which specific person is going to be prosecuted here? 28 years later, you still can't identify a single person. Do you think they'd even get a grand jury to indict in terms of, they can indict a ham sandwich, apparently, but they can't indict an empty plate with literally nothing on it but a handful of crumbs. That is literally how absurd this case is today. And again, what's this business about feelings?
But to have brought charges when you didn't feel you could make your case.
Cases aren't about feelings, they're about evidence. And can I just say, if you took the mountain of files and burned them, the DNA evidence, the fiber evidence, the autopsy evidence, the high-tech shoe print in the mold, the inconsistent statements, you took all of it and you just burned it. And all you were left with was the bogus ransom note. Yeah, we're dealing with a crime where a little girl is found inside the home and there's this bogus ransom note. If you just had that ransom note, you'd still have more than enough evidence to make your case just using the note and the circumstances surrounding it. So how you can say with a straight face that this case doesn't have any evidence to take it any further, it's very hard not to roll your eyes at that.
Would have been a horrible thing to do.
Really? What would have been so bad about taking the Ramsey case to trial? Like the Chris Watts case. It was an injustice that was begging to go to trial. Americans far and wide were begging for a trial. You even had mock trials on television shows. What would be so bad about airing the facts in public and allowing the case to settle, for the tear in the fabric of society to be examined and allowed to heal? Imagine if someone said regarding the Brian Koberger case, it would be horrible for this case to go to trial. It's absolutely necessary. And even if you didn't get a conviction, what you would get, as we saw in the Delphi trial, was a measure of closure, was a certain amount of disclosure that this was found and that was found and this is not integral to the case, the conspiracy stuff, the nonsense. And so what we saw with Delphi was justice not only done but seen to be done, not just the complete absence of it. And yet we have the opposite here. Justice not only not done, but not seen to be done. And then you find out all of this nonsense about there were those 4 indictments, those votes for the indictments all along. Now, I'm sure it would have been a horrible ordeal for the DA's office. I'm sure it would have been a horrible ordeal for the Ramseys. But JONBENET herself went through a horrible ordeal. JONBENET herself, instead of having this wonderful Christmas that all children deserve, went through a horrible ordeal. She ended up dead on the floor of her own family's basement. And then a mockery was made of this little child's life through the writing of this fake note. Everything that was contained in that note, the fact that JONBENET wasn't there, the fact that other people did this foreign faction, wasn't true. Trials are necessary ordeals in order to prevent the past from repeating itself, or worse, putting the rest of us through decades of endlessly regurgitated, self-justifying drivel, and especially the blaming of the police whose job it was to investigate the case. They didn't fail to investigate the case. The district attorney failed to prosecute it, even when the grand jury 4 times over asked him to.
I feel at peace and to some extent proud of the fact that I weathered the storm and did the right thing.
And I do think that's an interesting question. Did the right thing for who? Did the right thing for the Ramseys? And I think you could even make the case that maybe he did do the right thing for the Ramseys from a certain perspective. But you notice how he tacks on right at the end there, that he did what he did based on the evidence.
I weathered the storm and did the right thing based on the evidence.
He did what he did based on the evidence. Was that based on the evidence or the lack of evidence? Was there a lack of evidence? That's what he said during his first statement. Do you think there was a lack of evidence? There's so much evidence in this case it's able to prop up not 1 but 2 fully fledged theories, and it has spawned many more. You couldn't do that with no evidence. There's so much evidence that articles have been written listing a slew of potential suspects and the fabric of evidence possibly connecting them to the crime, this one, that one. Just JONBENET's body, just the artifacts surrounding her body and placed on her body, the paintbrush, the cords, the knots, the duct tape with fibers on the sticky side, the heart on her hand, the parallel marks, the essay, the fragment of birefringent material found inside her, the notion that her clothing was changed, that she was wiped down, the twin ponytails and hair ribbons still in her hair, the pineapple in her small intestine, the blow to her head that didn't break her skin, the blood in her nostrils, the fact that this was executed simultaneous to the asphyxia. Just this amounts to an enormous amount of evidence.
I feel at peace and to some extent proud.
It's strange that he's at peace when so much of America isn't regarding this case. I think America's not at peace, which is why Cold Case on Netflix, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, was the most watched series on Netflix during the week of November 25th to December 1st, with over 13 million views. People are watching that because they're not at peace with the result. And also, a lot of people watching that aren't at peace with this particular documentary.
But you must remember the Ramsey defense team. I mean, they haven't been charged yet, but they do have a defense team. There are there's 8 lawyers that I am aware of that work for the Ramseys. There are 3 publicists. There are 2 handwriting experts. There is an FBI profiler. When Greg McCrary turned down the job, John Douglas took it. There is a huge $1 million team here at work that works around the clock to put out the message that the John and Patsy Ramsey are innocent and to present their point of view and to try to, do their spin on this. So they've had some success, I suppose, but I think...
Has it worked? Do most people believe the Ramseys are innocent? And I did a poll on this channel. I don't know whether you agree with it or not, but have a look at this poll. Has it worked? Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.